The dawn of an American dream. Samantha Nguyen was born and raised in the sun-soaked suburbs of Southern California. Her world shaped by the constant hum of freeways and the gentle sway of palm trees. As a second-generation Vietnamese American, she grew up straddling two cultures, speaking both English and Vietnamese at home. From an early age, Sam had learned to navigate the delicate balance between respecting her family's traditions and embracing the tantalizing possibilities of her American surroundings. Life in Riverside was predictable, but far from easy. Samantha's parents, recent immigrants, worked long hours at a small grocery store on the edge of town, often leaving before sunrise and returning long after dark. Unable to care for their daughter full-time, they entrusted her upbringing to her uncle and aunt, who lived just a few blocks away. To Samantha, her relative's house, with its faint scent of incense and neat rows of family photos, symbolized both safety and constraint. Despite the weight of expectations and the quiet sacrifices that defined her childhood, Sam was a dreamer. By her sophomore year of high school, she had already mapped out her future. She would be the first in her family to attend a prestigious university, earn a degree in communications, and one day anchor the evening news on national television. She spent countless hours after school reading news articles, practicing her public speaking, and filming mock interviews on her phone. Her friends often joked that she'd become America's next big voice, and even some of her teachers quietly cheered her on. For Sam, the United States represented more than just freedom. It held the promise that hard work and talent could break any barrier. She cherished the little freedoms her American classmates took for granted, choosing her own clothes, laughing loudly in public, voicing her opinions in class debates. Yet, beneath her outward confidence lurked the constant pressure to succeed, not just for herself, but for everyone who had sacrificed to bring her here. Each morning, as golden sunlight filtered through her bedroom blinds, Samantha would run her fingers across the stack of college brochures on her desk, dreaming of faraway campuses where no one knew her family's history or the rules she was expected to follow. In the stillness of dawn, surrounded by magazine clippings and handwritten essays, she let herself imagine a new beginning, one where she could chase her ambitions freely, define her own identity, and prove, both to her family and to herself, that she truly belonged in this land of endless possibility. Invisible barriers. As Samantha moved through her teenage years, the invisible walls hemming in her life grew steadily higher. Outwardly, her uncle and aunt provided for her needs: a tidy room, home-cooked meals full of flavors from both continents, transportation to and from school. But these comforts came with tightly woven strings. Expectation. Within the Nguyen household, there was an unspoken code anchored in old traditions. Never question elders, always put family first, and above all, pursue only those paths deemed respectable. Samantha quickly realized that every decision, big or small, was subject to scrutiny. Her choice of friends was constantly questioned. Her aunt would ask probing questions about their grades, their families, their properness. Social gatherings almost always required permission, and curfews were strictly enforced. If she lingered too long after debate team or drama club meetings, her phone would light up with urgent texts reminding her to come home. Clothes, too, were a battlefield. Trendy tops, short skirts, and ripped jeans, all perfectly normal at her high school, were quietly disapproved of, or more often, outright banned in her uncle's house. Instead, her wardrobe consisted of plain shirts and faded jeans that hid her personality as much as her figure. The rare moments she wore something bold, She braced herself for disapproving looks or tense, clipped conversations at dinner. But the tightest constraints wrapped around Samantha's ambitions. While she dreamed of journalism and imagined herself speaking on national television, her relatives insisted that such a career was reckless and insecure. They pushed her toward medicine, engineering, or accounting, the traditional, safe professions, pointing to their stability and respect. Any mention of communications was met with dismissive laughter, or worse, silent disappointment that lingered for days. This constant surveillance stifled her sense of self. There were times when Samantha felt as if she was performing in an endless audition for approval that never quite arrived. Her family's love felt conditional. She was accepted only when she stayed within the invisible boundaries they had drawn. Even at school, where her peers saw her as bright and outgoing, Samantha could never shake the nagging anxiety that she was not enough, not American enough, not obedient enough, not worthy enough. Sometimes, late at night, as the distant sound of sirens echoed through the suburb and her phone lay dark beside her, Samantha would wonder if she would ever be able to step outside these constraints. Did other families watch their children so closely, weigh every choice so heavily? Or was this just her burden to carry, the price for dreams that seemed to drift further out of reach with every passing year? Disaster Strike's senior year began with a restless energy that pulsed through the hallways of Riverside High. College applications, standardized tests, and ambitious dreams seemed to bind Samantha Nguyen and her classmates together. And for the first time, she felt on the cusp of something bigger than her small-town life. Samantha poured herself into her studies, took on leadership roles in the debate club, and spent nights poring over essays for Ivy League schools. Her teachers encouraged her, their letters of recommendation glowing with praise. Close friends cheered her on, sending reassuring texts before interviews or test days. For just a moment, life seemed to crack open. Finally, Samantha could start to imagine herself taking flight. But at home, anxiety simmered beneath her surface confidence. The unspoken tension with her uncle and aunt never dissipated, especially as college acceptance letters grew nearer. They urged her to focus on practical paths and stable futures, dismissing her dream universities as too far away or unrealistic. Yet Samantha's determination only deepened. She believed that if she worked hard enough, if her achievements shone brightly enough, she'd earn the right to decide her own future. Then, everything changed with a single accusation. It was on a chilly Tuesday afternoon, barely 3 weeks before early college decisions were due, that Samantha's world began to unravel. She came home from a marathon debate practice to find her uncle waiting in the living room, arms crossed, a tightly folded letter clutched in his hand. The letter was from the school, a formal notice about a reported incident concerning plagiarism on her most important entrance exam. Her heart raced as she tried, in vain, to understand. Her uncle's voice trembled with anger and embarrassment. He accused her, in front of her aunt and 2 cousins, of shaming the family. "How could you be so careless, Samantha? Why would you disrespect the people who sacrificed so much to bring you here?" Her protests were met with cold skepticism. There was no family meeting for support, no comforting words. Her own relatives delivered the news, a teacher's anonymous tip, suspicion from school administrators, and finally, a written statement from one of her own cousins, corroborating the accusation. Samantha's hands shook as she realized, with horrifying clarity, that the betrayal came from within the walls she called home. Desperate to clear her name, Samantha pleaded with the school counselor. She gathered every draft, every stack of notes,
That's exactly what I
and even
needed.
recordings of her study sessions from her phone. But the evidence was
I don't
deemed
think that's what happened here.
inconclusive.
We've been over this.
The administration
evidence suggests
decided,
otherwise.
in the absence of ironclad proof, that her application would be flagged for academic dishonesty. Her dream university, a place she had spent years picturing so vividly, immediately retracted her early acceptance. One by one, other schools followed suit,
This isn't just a local
their polite
story.
rejection
This
letters
is
a chorus
systemic
of
issue
disappointment.
with national
Worse
implications.
still, the accusation began to ripple through Riverside's tight-knit immigrant community. Rumors fueled by whispers and half-truths spread fast.
Thank you.
Did you hear?
Hi.
Samantha Nguyen cheated on her college
Surprise.
application. Parents who had once boasted about her
Are you able to
grades
comment on the new
now
findings
warn
of the
their
case, sir?
children to stay away.
There.
At school, glances turned sidelong and invitations dried up. Even teachers, who had once been her champions, now looked at her with pity and discomfort rather than pride. Through it all, Samantha found herself locked in a silent war with her family. Late at night, after her aunt and uncle had gone to bed, she sat on the cold tile of the kitchen floor, staring at her phone, searching for any way to reverse the injustice. She called the admissions offices herself, her polite words trembling with desperation. She wrote letters she never sent. She typed, deleted, and retyped explanations for her friends, rage and sorrow welling up in every word. But her voice felt stolen. It was as if the world had decided who she was, an imposter, a disappointment, a liar, without ever giving her a trial. The uncle she once trusted locked her out of family conversations. Her aunt avoided her eyes at breakfast. Her cousin, the quiet source of the betrayal, gave her a wide berth in the hallway, as if shrouded in shame or guilt. Samantha could never know which. The worst moments, though, were the silences. The silence during family dinners, when her achievements were never mentioned. The silence from friends who didn't know what to say. The silence in her room at night, where college brochures, gathered dust, and rejection emails glowed on her phone. Inside, rage swirled with heartbreak, all tangled up with the feeling of being utterly alone. As weeks dragged on, Samantha's world shrank. She stopped attending debate club. The award certificates on her wall no longer brought pride, only regret. She packed away her journalism notebooks and the half-written anchor scripts she once rehearsed. Sometimes she wondered if she would ever find her voice again, or if she should simply accept that her story had ended before it truly began. And yet, in the small, stubborn flame that had guided her since childhood, Samantha refused to fully surrender. She kept a journal, filling its pages with memories of what happened. Her truth, in her own words, when no one else would listen. On the coldest nights, she looked out at the street beyond her window, wishing for a world where justice could be restored and dignity reclaimed through pain, humiliation, and unspeakable sadness. She learned a hard lesson. In America, even the land of opportunity, there were darker sides to ambition: jealousy, sabotage, and the wounds inflicted by those closest to you. The American dream, it seemed, could just as easily be shattered by invisible hands as achieved by sheer determination. But deep down, Samantha held on to a new conviction. One day, her story wouldn't end here. Betrayal would not have the final word. She would put her truth into the world, and when she did, she vowed the silence would finally be broken. A new beginning. The decision to leave Riverside came slowly, but when it finally arrived, it struck Samantha with the clarity and sharpness of sunrise on a winter morning. The old life, with its suffocating walls, muted accusations, and stifled dreams, had grown too unbearable to sustain. For months after her world collapsed, she wandered the edges of town. Library
never got to
aisles,
say goodbye.
anonymous coffee shops, the silent, empty side streets, searching for any hint of solitude or hope. Every familiar face she encountered, every whispered rumor that floated past her in the school hallway, reminded her that her old existence was synonymous with shame. College brochures, now more like ghosts than promises, were hidden at the back of her closet, but not thrown out. Something stubborn within her refused to give up on the idea of college, no matter how far-fetched it seemed. She found herself sitting on the roof of her uncle's small house, late at night, wrapped in a blanket, watching airplanes blink patterns across the dark Los Angeles sky. Where were those people flying? What did they leave behind? Did anyone else on board know what it felt like to have their future ripped away by hands that were supposed to protect them? These questions became fuel for her transformation.
everything that happened
The
that
final
night.
push came one chilly March night, weeks before graduation, after a dinner spent staring at her untouched food and the backs of her family's tired hands. Samantha realized, with sudden certainty, that staying would only diminish her further. She would never be able to clear her name here. She was a living reminder of disappointment for them and for herself, a shadow of what she had hoped to become. She needed a space where no one knew her story, a place big enough for reinvention. With whatever savings she had scraped together from part-time jobs, mostly working the register at the family grocery store and tutoring neighborhood kids, Samantha bought a one-way bus ticket east, toward a city where she had no roots. Her aunt pressed a modest roll of emergency bills into her hand without making eye contact. Samantha said goodbye as quietly as she had lived in their home. The bus ride across state lines was long and dreamlike, measured by the rhythmic highway hum and the shifting colors of dawn and dusk. As she watched the California landscape peel away, Samantha felt a strange combination of fear and liberation. She was alone for the first time in her life. Her only baggage, a battered duffel, packed with threadbare clothes, half-used notebooks, and a single, unmailed letter written to her mother in the old country. She arrived in the city, gray, sprawling, unfamiliar, just as early spring winds picked up, blowing grit and hope in equal measure. The reality hit hard. This was not the spectacular beginning she had always pictured. She had no welcoming friends, no dorm move-in day, no safety net. The community college building, with its peeling paint and outdated computers, seemed a far cry from the leafy campuses of her dreams. But it was hers. Here, her past was invisible, her future unwritten. The early days were grueling. Samantha became just another anonymous commuter in a sea of new faces, students balancing classes with night shifts and family obligations, immigrants fighting for a piece of the American promise, single parents scribbling essays between bus stops. It was humbling and, in some way, reassuring to be among strivers. No one cared about her shame here. Everyone carried their own burdens. Housing was a challenge. With no credit history and little money, Samantha rented a tiny room in a run-down row house, shared with two other girls, juggling waitressing jobs and online classes. The utilities sputtered, and a leaky window let in the city chill. But it was a start. Samantha learned to chase sleep whenever she could. Naps between classes, stolen hours after late-night shifts at a Vietnamese restaurant, or before dawn, as the city came to life outside her window. Financial survival became an exercise in creativity and grit. She took whatever jobs she could find, bussing tables, stocking shelves at a convenience store, hashtag writing for a small online t-shirt shop, and even translating simple paperwork for older immigrants unfamiliar with English. Every dollar was precious. Samantha learned the true cost of independence. There were days when all she could afford was ramen and cold coffee, when bus fare meant skipping dinner. But every hardship seemed lighter than the emotional price she had paid back in Riverside. School, however, remained the anchor of her days. In the haphazard rhythms of community college, Samantha found a new kind of possibility. Registration lines were long, and the courses weren't always what she'd dreamed. But the professors, many of whom were juggling second jobs, just like their students, cared deeply. In remedial English and intro-level communications, Samantha rebuilt her confidence, one assignment at a time. She discovered new friends, classmates who saw her as she was, not as the girl from a scandal. Samantha joined the campus's small journalism club, determined not to abandon her true passion. She began by covering local stories, street fairs, city council debates, immigrant success stories. Her voice, first tentative, grew steadier with each article. She brought her notebooks everywhere, jotting down overheard conversations on the subway and snippets of lives colliding in the city's crowded parks. She still called her parents from time to time, though the conversations were brief and stilted. Her mother's voice, tired but loving, always ended calls by saying, "Kong sao jiao kon, ko len," urging Samantha to keep moving forward. Her father remained largely silent, his disappointment lingering in the space between spoken words. But Samantha pressed on, understanding that her journey would never be a straight line. Gradually, Samantha's world began to expand in directions she hadn't anticipated. She found mentors, an adjunct professor who encouraged her to submit essays to local newspapers, an elderly neighbor who introduced her to the city's Vietnamese Community Center. She discovered free workshops on digital storytelling and began experimenting with social media, sharing pieces of her story in veiled language, posts about hope, about starting over, about refusing to let your past destroy you. The city's anonymity became freedom. She could walk through busy streets without fear of judgment, reinventing herself every day if she wanted. There were setbacks, classes she barely passed, weeks where money ran out, memories that cut like old wounds whenever she saw someone wearing a Riverside High hoodie in the subway crowd. But each small victory was fiercely her own. The first A on a research paper, the first check for a published article, a new friend who never once asked, "What really happened back home?" Through it all, Samantha learned that there was a kind of dignity in survival, in stitching together a life from nothing but determination and grit. The dream of national newsrooms and Ivy League towers had faded, but in its place was something more resilient, a sense of self that no accusation, no betrayal could completely destroy. She wasn't waiting for permission to begin. She was writing her next chapter every day, word by word, in a city that finally gave her space to breathe. Resurrection and revenge. 5 years had passed since Samantha Nguyen's world had collapsed in Riverside. In that time, the girl who once sat trembling beneath the judgment of her family and the weight of communal shame had transformed into a woman with unwavering resolve and an unbreakable sense of self. Her journey had not been a tidy ascent, but a jagged, hard-fought climb. Every step shaped by the sting of injustice and the fierce need to find her own voice in a world that too often silenced people like her. Samantha's new life revolved around the pulse of the city. No longer just a survivor, she had become a storyteller and, unexpectedly, an influencer. The determination that once drove her toward the anchor's desk on network television now fueled her creative energy across social media platforms. By day, she managed digital content for a nonprofit amplifying Asian American stories. By night and weekend, she poured herself into her own projects, chipping away at stories that refused to let her rest. It all started quietly, a series of TikTok videos, filmed in the soft glow of her cramped bedroom, her phone propped on a pile of library books. At first, her videos were only small snippets, stories about adjusting to life in a new city, about the silent exhaustion of being the model minority, about the pain of being misunderstood by the very people you loved most. She disguised personal details, at first, unsure if the world wanted to hear the raw, ugly truths she'd carried for so long. But the internet, with its bottomless appetite for authenticity, seemed to sense her sincerity. A video about family expectations and the shame of false accusations went viral overnight. The comments section exploded with stories just like hers, second-generation children who felt crushed under impossible cultural standards, college students accused of mistakes they didn't make, young professionals still trying to mend relationships with parents who only valued outward success. As her platform grew, Samantha found herself at a strange crossroads. Part of her cherished the anonymity of her new life, the ability to reinvent herself every morning in the reflection of a city window.
It was his brother.
But a louder part yearned for justice, for the world to finally know her truth. What had been taken from her in the glare of public disgrace could only be reclaimed in public light. So, Samantha took a leap. She crafted a video series titled, "The Effect Was Immediate and Electric." Within hours, thousands of viewers stitched her video, overlaying their own faces and heartbreaks onto her narrative. DMs flooded in,
Damn it.
messages of sympathy, outrage, solidarity. There were university students from coast to coast, Asian Americans, and children of immigrants from all backgrounds, telling her she was brave, strong, and, most importantly, believed. But the videos resonated beyond her immediate followers. Eventually, her story was picked up by a digital magazine that specialized in Asian American culture and identity. An editor reached out, asking Samantha for an in-depth interview.
What did you see?
For the first time, she described everything.
He was very agitated.
The years of
yelling
work
at the
that
staff.
vanished in a moment, the sense of betrayal from her own family, the slow path back to recovery. The writer's article, sharp and compassionate, struck a national chord. Other media outlets took notice. The pressure of visibility was both exhilarating and terrifying. For every message of support, there were others who questioned her account or sent anonymous threats. But Samantha had learned to endure skepticism. The bigger her audience grew, the less she feared her doubters. She knew that telling the truth, even when it cracked old scars open, was the only way to heal. Her social media series continued. She brought in guests, psychologists who could speak on family trauma, fellow survivors of false accusations, Asian American leaders who'd been smeared or ostracized for daring to speak up. The conversation became bigger than just one case of academic dishonesty. It became a movement, a space where the overlooked, the maligned, and the unjustly accused could finally reclaim their dignity. Behind the scenes, the ripple effect reached all the way back to Riverside. Word spread. Students from her high school remembered the rumors and the way staff had quietly distanced themselves from Samantha years earlier. Some began to ask questions. An old debate teammate reached out, asking for details. Local community leaders who'd once turned their backs now offered public support in online comments. Even the cousin who had made the fateful accusation was summoned by the family's elders to explain himself. Facts, long buried, started to emerge. A teacher, nearing retirement and racked by guilt,
So they both
finally
owned this
sent
land.
Samantha a written statement admitting that the process had been unfair, that there had never been real evidence, only suspicion fueled by bias and hearsay. A former administrator admitted, off the record, that her case had been handled hastily with undue pressure
Just gonna
from
slide this
influential
over here for
parents.
you.
The online outrage swelled, this time on Samantha's behalf. Soon, Samantha was approached by academic
right here.
organizations
And you're certain
and
of this
student
location?
advocacy groups. She spoke, first virtually, then in person, about the dangers of bias in educational systems, the painful legacy of silence and shame in immigrant families, and the possibility of reclaiming a narrative stolen by injustice. Each time she stepped up before a new crowd, the knot in her stomach loosened. The more she shared, the lighter her story became, less an anchor and more a sail. Her family, too, could no longer ignore the public reckoning.
We can't tell
Her
anyone.
uncle,
We're in this
red-faced and stony, delivered an awkward but necessary apology during a begrudging phone call. Her aunt wept, an ocean of regret in her voice, the kind that had years to gather
Focus on
force.
demonstrating your
Even
lack
her
of
parents, back in Vietnam,
crucial for a
found
jury
out
to
about the
understand the
videos.
context.
Her mother, through sniffles, whispered that she was proud, her own shame eclipsed by pride in her daughter's resilience. But revenge, Samantha discovered, wasn't about destruction or humiliation, at least not anymore. Instead, it was about reclamation. By resurrecting her name, her voice, and her truth, she had finally broken the generational pattern of swallowing injustice for the sake of family harmony. Her triumph was not just personal. She had created a space for countless others to stop suffering in silence. In the city where her new life had begun, she celebrated not with vengeance, but with gratitude. She dined with her closest friends, people who'd supported her through years of self-doubt and slow healing. She recorded a final video for the series, not as a victim or even as an avenger, but as a survivor and builder. I hope this journey helps at least one other person, she signed off. Find the courage to reclaim their story. Her American dream, once shattered by unseen hands, had been painstakingly rebuilt, brick by brick, stronger and brighter than before. The truth revealed time, as Samantha had learned, did not always heal wounds on its own. Sometimes, it simply moved the pain further from daily life, letting it gather in dark corners, waiting to be called forth. But sometimes, when the truth is finally given light, even the deepest wounds begin to close, and the world rearranges itself in subtle, sweet ways that once seemed impossible. By the start of her sixth year away from Riverside, Samantha's story had spread far beyond the boundaries of her adopted city. Her videos remained in circulation on social media, shared, restitched, debated, and discussed. She had spoken on virtual panels with other survivors of injustice, been profiled in digital and print magazines, and found her words quoted by student leaders in distant states. What began as a solitary, desperate bid to have her voice heard had grown into an echoing chorus. Others, emboldened by her vulnerability and resilience, began to tell their own stories, sometimes tagging her in posts or quietly emailing their thanks. Yet, for all the ripples in the wider world, the past still hovered, a persistent, buzzing presence at the back of Samantha's mind. Some nights, she still woke in the dark, memories of Riverside swirling at the edge of sleep, the cold, disbelieving eyes of her uncle, the cousin's hand clutching the damning letter, the consuming silence of her empty room. She wondered if anything could ever change the narrative printed onto her history, the one that painted her as the guilty party, the shame of the family, the girl who was banished. Then, gradually and unexpectedly, the dam broke. The first hint came as a private message on her now thriving advocacy account. It was from Mina Tran, a classmate from Riverside High, whom Samantha had not seen since graduation. Mina, once quiet and watchful, now wrote with a purposeful urgency. Samantha, I'm not sure if you remember me, but I've been watching your videos. I had no idea what you went through. Back in senior year, my parents told me to keep out of your business, but it never felt right. There's a lot you might not know about what happened behind the scenes, and someone else has started talking about it, too. Mina's message was accompanied by a link to a private social media group, a gathering place for alumni of Riverside High, some of whom remembered the scandal, others who had only heard whispers. Someone had uploaded copies of school records and a recent letter from Mr. Cohen, the English teacher who'd been deeply involved in student affairs during Samantha's time there. The letter was addressed to the current school principal and had been posted, with permission, by his niece. In it, Mr. Cohen wrote candidly about his guilt. For weeks, the online group buzzed as old wounds reopened and new perspectives emerged. Former teachers and staff members, now retired or working elsewhere, began to share fragments of the truth. Some remembered clear inconsistencies in the investigation, alibis that were ignored, evidence that was never logged. One counselor admitted privately to Mina that she'd been instructed behind closed doors not to make waves for the school or the families involved. A handful of students shared that they'd always found the cousin's story dubious. One even recalled being pressured to remember seeing cheating, when, in truth, they hadn't. Word of these revelations traveled swiftly. Soon, not only Samantha, but the Nguyen family, members of the immigrant community, and even local news found themselves forced to confront the scandal anew. For weeks, Samantha watched as the story unfolded almost without her. It was both dizzying and surreal. Her phone buzzed with interview requests from media outlets that had ignored her for years. Activist groups wanted to know if she would speak at rallies or join their campaigns for educational reform. Even more astonishingly, her cousin reached out with a tentative, guilt-ridden apology text. The formal apology she had dreamt about for so long came not in a grand gesture, but as a series of reluctant but necessary acts. It began with an official letter from the Riverside High administration, signed by new and former staff. They acknowledged mistakes, cited the findings from the reopened internal review, and offered to publicly clear Samantha's name at the next school board meeting. The message was clear. They could no longer sweep this truth aside. Samantha returned to Riverside for the first time in years, uncertain of how she would be received. Gone was the trembling girl who had slunk through side hallways. She stepped onto campus as both an outsider and a symbol. Her old debate coach, lines of regret and pride etching his face, met her at the entrance and pressed her hand. Unable to find words, she accepted his gesture with a simple nod. Her forgiveness had already begun, long before this moment. At the school board meeting, the air crackled with anticipation. Parents, students, and local press packed the small auditorium. The principal read a brief statement outlining the wrongs of the past and presented Samantha with a framed certificate exonerating her from all wrongdoing. The audience, for the first time since her youth, rose in applause. Some faces glowed with pride, others looked stricken with guilt, but nearly all showed relief that the heavy silence had finally been broken. After the meeting, families who had once kept their distance approached her, offering words of apology and admiration. Classmates she hadn't spoken to in a decade awkwardly embraced her. Mina stood beside her, eyes shining, and whispered, "You did this. You made them see." But for Samantha, the most powerful part of the evening came at home. Her aunt and uncle, older, more humbled, carrying the weight of their own regrets, opened the door without reservation. Her uncle, for the first time,
I understand
held
your
her gaze
skepticism,
and
but I
murmured,
am innocent.
"Forgive me, Samantha. We should have believed in you." Tears blurred her vision, but this time they were born not of pain, but of relief. That night, Samantha walked the familiar streets of Riverside beneath a clear sky, feeling a lightness that had been denied her for so long. The city hadn't changed, but she had. The past, once so heavy and defining, finally felt like what it truly was, past. Yet the path forward was about more than clearing her own name. Samantha knew there were countless others who
really
still
needed
labored
someone to
under
know,
false
someone to
accusations or family shame, who struggled with the weight of secrets and silence. In her speeches, in her writing, and in her daily life, she vowed to keep the door open for truth, for herself, for her community, and for all who needed to believe that healing was possible and that the truth, when spoken bravely, could always set you free. When Samantha Nguyen stood accused years ago, "I did not do my due diligence. I was swayed by hearsay, not hard evidence. I regret my silence and the damage that followed." Facing justice, starting over, for the first time in her adult life, Samantha Nguyen stood under the uncompromising glare of fluorescent lights in Riverside's City Hall, eyes adjusting not just to the harsh brightness, but to her newfound sense of legitimacy. The journey to this moment had been non-linear, years of anguish and struggle, of fighting to reclaim her story from the false accusations and silence that once threatened to destroy her. Now, as she awaited the start of the public hearing that would cement her exoneration before the community, reality settled on her shoulders, heavier than any shame or doubt had ever weighed. The room was packed. Local activists and administration officials, teachers from the old high school, a few remaining reporters, and many members of the Vietnamese American community filled every row. Many had heard Samantha's story only in whispers. Most had never expected to see her standing here, tall and calm, ready to face not only her family's past mistakes, but the culture of secrecy that had once suffocated her. On the dais, the superintendent and a panel of school board members shuffled nervously through highlighted documents. Samantha recognized the faces of her former teachers, some older and smaller now, hair turned gray or thin, their expressions a blend of pride, anxiety, and regret. Mina, her old classmate and new friend, caught her gaze and gave an encouraging smile, echoing the support of those who had finally learned to believe in her. The hearing began with a statement from the school district, officially acknowledging the errors in the original investigation. Incomplete evidence, hasty disciplinary action, improperly handled witness statements, and undue influence from families desperate to preserve reputation over truth. They apologized, formally, publicly, and without equivocation, for the damage done to Samantha's name and her future. As the words echoed through the chamber, Samantha felt both vindicated and strangely detached, as if she were watching her life unfold through someone else's eyes. Then her uncle was called upon, no longer her accuser nor her warden, but a remorseful kin facing the consequences of his choices. Voice trembling with emotion, he barely bothered to hide. He read from a letter. Everyone in the audience seemed to draw a collective breath as Samantha stepped forward to speak, not just as a wounded individual, but as someone now charged with a greater responsibility. Her voice, steady and clear, resonated to the farthest row. She spoke of the risk immigrant families face in balancing tradition against openness, about how unchecked rumors and the demand for perfection can become weapons. More than once, she saw shoulders shaking or eyes shining with tears, not simply for her, but for what her words revealed about wounds quietly shared by many in the room. She urged the school board to institute training on implicit bias, fair disciplinary procedures, and open dialogues with families from diverse backgrounds. She called for courage, not just for the wronged, but for those who had power to speak up when consensus demanded silence. When she sat, applause rose from all corners of the hall, hesitant at first, then loud and sustained. The clearest mark of her victory came not only through public exoneration, but through private reconciliation. In the days following the hearing, Samantha sat down with her uncle, aunt, and cousins in their modest home. The sight of so much of her pain. The atmosphere was somber but unguarded, words flowing more freely after so many years of tension. Her cousin, formerly an antagonist, found the nerve to offer a tearful, halting apology, revealing his own struggles with jealousy and the impossible weight he'd felt as a child, caught between adult expectations. Yet Samantha's story did not end with personal closure. The community, shaken from apathy, now looked to her as both a cautionary tale and an example of fortitude. She was invited to universities, cultural centers, and local advocacy groups as a guest speaker. At UCLA, she delivered a keynote on the challenges faced by first-generation immigrants in the American education system. In school auditoriums from Orange County to San Jose, Vietnamese parents brought their children to hear Samantha describe the costs of silence, the burden of perfectionism, and the power that came from compassion and second chances. Her journalism, once stifled, now found an eager audience. She published op-eds and essays about immigrant shame, educational injustice, and the necessity of reform. Publishers requested her memoir. Radio producers sought her out for interviews. She used her platform not to inflict pain or parcel out blame, but to ignite conversations long overdue. Boldly, Samantha refused to let her narrative be distilled into either mere victimhood or simple redemption. The story that once seemed destined to define her forever as the girl who was shamed evolved instead. In the city that had once made her a pariah, Samantha became a touchstone for resilience and a voice for transformation. Younger students who once feared their family's scrutiny or their school's discipline now approached her online and in person, grateful for the honesty and hope she represented. In quieter moments, Samantha still wrestled with scars, both visible and hidden. Certain memories, a cold kitchen floor at midnight, the echo of relatives' disappointed whispers, would never fully lose their sting. Yet, for the first time, she lived without fear of the next shoe dropping, without shame for dreams that didn't fit prescribed expectations. Each day, she honored her story not by dwelling on the past's injustices, but by forging a future where dignity was hers to define. As autumn settled in Riverside that year, Samantha wandered the unfamiliar downtown, watching children in the immigrant neighborhood play beneath banners celebrating Community Pride Month, pausing to listen to street musicians whose song filled the evening with hope. She realized finally that freedom could not be given. It had to be claimed again and again. Her journey with justice and with herself would never truly end, but it had started anew. And this time, Samantha was facing forward, unafraid and ready.